Welcome, travelers. We're aware that your journey was difficult, but prepare to have your questions answered, for you have been granted an audience with the Masters of Modern.
And welcome back to Masters of Modern. I'm your host, Michael Grothy, here with Nick Prince.
Hello.
Ben and Alex are still out for the month of October, so I'm taking over the podcast, and I'm here with guests. How's it going?
It's going pretty well. We just got decklist for Mythic Championship 5, which not the topic of this podcast, but Standard looks like it's in some sort of place right now.
Yeah,
a lot of cool decisions. So I've kind of been geeking out over that so far, and then I spent a lot of time yesterday looking at the Modern results out of SCG Indianapolis. Drake Sasser, very cool guy, won with Giftstorm, and I was very happy for him.
Yeah, not something I expected to win, but I think it was probably a good choice.
Yeah, it's
obviously it was a good choice.
Well, yeah, I mean it's like that how once every 2 or 3 months Affinity does really well.
Yeah,
or Storm does. It's just that sort of deck where man, it's a terrible choice 7 out of 8 times, but when you hit the right timing, it's just perfect.
Yeah, well, and it's funny because it did the same thing in Legacy a couple weeks ago, where nobody was really expecting Storm to be a big thing, but it's just one of those decks where the power level is high enough that if people aren't really ready for it, you can take them, take down the tournament.
Yeah, absolutely. And shout out to Cyrus for basically just, as far as I can tell, staging that whole revolution by himself. And now it's just taking down every other event, it feels like.
Yeah.
In Legacy.
So for any viewers or listeners who don't know, who are you?
Yeah, that's a good question. So my name is Nick Prince. I am mostly known for being very loud on Twitter. I write for TCG Player now since the last time I've been on. I've been a guest before. I have competed in 1 Mythic Championship in London. I play as many tournaments as I can, which can be a little tricky in Los Angeles because we're just kind of far from everything, as it turns out. Despite being a gigantic city, there's not all that many large events here. And I also do a podcast with Magic Online grinder VTCLA, better known as, or maybe less known as, Baker Neenan. And we talk mostly about deck building, primarily about Standard, but also about Modern.
Yeah.
So especially this summer, we spent a lot of time talking about Hogak. I think Baker was one of the first people who really broke Hogak. He was putting up those first results on Magic Online where everyone went like, oh no.
Yeah.
Did they break the format? Oh, they broke the format.
Yeah, so. Yeah. With Altered Dementia still legal.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That entire era was a lot of fun because we basically just got to talk about Hogak for 2 months I think while we were both playing it.
And I think when Modern Horizons first came out, there was that period of discovery where it's there's obvious that there's some broken stuff here. What is it?
Yeah.
And it turns out it was Hogak. And we're still, feeling a lot of the fallout of Modern Horizons post Hogak.
Oh, 100%. Well, and now Throne of Eldraine, Modern Horizons added a ton, but that makes sense. It was a set that was focused on Modern. If we had gotten a normal amount of cards out of Modern Horizons, that would have been weird, where we were okay, yeah, Urza and Hogak, those are the 2, and now and then we also have 257 other cards that are technically legal, and maybe you'll sideboard a Shenanigans or whatever sometimes.
Yeah.
But Throne of Eldraine has a surprising amount of power in it for Modern, Legacy, and whatnot.
For sure. I mean, looking at this open top 8, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out of the top 8 decks have 4+ Eldraine cards. So
did you count Jund Death Shadow? That has a Once Upon a Time.
Oh yeah, it's got 2. I didn't. Yeah. So six of these decks have Eldraine cards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's
really. I think the only one I think the only one that doesn't is Gift Storm, but he might have been playing a Mystic Dispute if I remember right.
Yeah, in the sideboard, that's right.
Spoiler: that card is very good. If you haven't played it in Standard yet, consider playing it in Modern also, because
I have been playing it in Standard actually. Yeah, it's interesting because it's kind of main deckable in Standard. A lot of the time you're stuck playing 3-mana counter spells anyway, and then the fact that if your opponent is trying to play Teferi or Oko or something, you just got him.
Yep, exactly. It's the sort of thing where, as I'm looking ahead to what I would assume in Standard is going to be a Field of the Dead ban, and we're not sure if Oko is going to get the axe or not, the ability to counter Oko on turn with just 1 mana, it's basically Spell Pierce. And then, unlike Spell Pierce, though, it's not dead, like you're saying.
Right.
It's sometimes just a bad mana leak, and sometimes that's good enough.
Yeah, and especially in this Standard environment where you have a lot of tap lands, and you're playing Temple on turn 1, and then you don't have a 2-drop, so you're playing like Shockland on turn 2 tapped or something. And that 1 mana, that can counter the Oko or the Teferi if you're on the draw. And I've had that come up a bunch playing a bad blue-red deck in Standard.
Right. Well, and there's a bunch of other stuff. There's just a bunch of weird things that it hits. Like, I mean, people are playing nonsense like Agent of Treachery, which even if they ban Field of the Dead, I don't think that's going away. Agent is still one of the best things you can do for 7 mana. Stealing something permanently is big.
And Nissa is probably sticking around no matter what. So,
well, and Hydroid Crisis. Nobody ever plays Hydroid Crisis with 3 mana open. They play it for all of the available mana.
Yeah.
So you can always just get the body. And like, maybe that's not ideal, but I would much rather discard a card to make them lose their 8/8 or whatever. And then in Modern, it's kind of perfect because we're also seeing a ton of Emery, right?
Yeah.
Where the ability to just use your snow-covered island to counter their necessary combo piece is pretty important.
Yeah, and it counters Urza. It counters, like, I guess Urza and Emery are the 2 big ones that we're seeing in this top 8, but obviously it counters a lot of stuff out of like blue-white, which you're going to come up against in every Modern tournament forever.
Exactly. It counters Narset on turn 3. It counters Little Teferi on turn 3. It counters Big Teferi on turn 5.
Yeah.
So then they don't get to untap those lands they were counting on. I think Mystic Dispute is like quietly one of the better cards from Eldraine, but people haven't picked it up because it just kind of feels like this like dinky sideboard card, but it's quite good.
And it's interesting because like it competes with a lot of other cards for that kind of like sideboard counterspell slot in Modern, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I think the popularity of Urza decks, like I don't think that it's questionable that Urza is. I think before Eldraine, it was probably just the best deck. Now with Amulet Titan getting Once Upon a Time, which is a very big get for them, I think that like you can make an argument that those are the top 2 decks. But because Urza is so good, I think that Mystic Dispute is definitely worth paying attention to because countering Emery is so important against something like these Jeskai Ascendancy decks where you can not only like get rid of the Emery, they don't mill themselves. And it has kind of effects on how they're going to play their game going forward.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that these results are kind of reflecting those 2 as the top decks from the Star City Open and the Classic this weekend. Before we get too far, I want to do all the shout outs. We've got... don't forget to follow us and subscribe and like the video on YouTube. It really supports us, even if you're a podcast listener. If you go over to our YouTube and like our videos and subscribe to our channel, it really helps us out. If you are a podcast listener, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and like the podcast. That helps us out as well. You can follow us on Twitter to get updates about, future episodes and meetups and all kinds of things that we like to do. Alex has been trying to get streaming started. He's been streaming a little bit of Arena, and I think once the Mac client comes out, it'll become a lot easier for him. So if you want to know where to find all that stuff, follow us on Twitter at VMMcast. You can follow Alex at Kess Wiley, Ben at Ben Bateman Media. I'm at Dudard, Dudardd. And if you want to follow Nick, if you like the episode,
I'm at Nick N. Prince.
We also have a Facebook group, which is the official Masters of Modern Facebook group. It's one of the bigger Modern Facebook groups. I think it might be the biggest. So there's a lot of great discussion there about, Modern format and decks and results. And we have like a stats guy who goes through and like pulls all the results and tells you, this many decks were in the top 32 and all that stuff. So there's a lot of good stuff in the Facebook group. Also support us on Patreon. That's, how we get to keep this show going and how we get to, provide this crystal clear audio and and it's all because of the people who support us on Patreon. You also get access to uncut episodes where we often will have, little side conversations that end up getting cut for time or, bloopers and stuff like that in the uncut episodes. You also get access to a couple of extra channels on our Patreon where we post deck lists and stuff like that. On our Discord, did I say Patreon? I meant extra channels on our Discord where you get access. We'll post lists on there and stuff like that. Also, don't forget to check out our sister podcast, The Command Zone. If you are looking for Commander content, they put out the best Commander content out there with game nights and their podcast Command Zone. So, check them out. Let's get back to Modern. Let's look at these decks. So you were saying that you think the 2 top decks are Urza, Outcome, and Titan. And I think that these results reflect that. In the Open, we've got one Urza and 2 Amulet Titan. And in the Classic, we've got 1, 2, 3 Urza and an Amulet Titan. So they are definitely like consistently putting up results in, you know, the one big modern tournament the 2 big modern tournaments that we've got so far.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think specifically the Urza outcome decks are the better versions of the decks. I think they're just a little bit more able to enact their game plan through disruption. What I was really unimpressed with from the Urza Ascendancy list, the versions playing Jeskai Ascendancy and Emry, are that the decks really don't function that well without Emry.
Yeah.
Because in order to combo off and justify playing Jeskai Ascendancy, you have to have the ability to continually cast and recast artifacts from your graveyard, whereas Urza Outcome has mostly just a ton of interchangeable pieces, and you just kind of need some amount of them in order to go off, because eventually you'll just find an Urza and play it, and now you have infinite mana, and even if your opponent kills it, you can kind of still keep going off because you make 9 mana or whatnot, bounce everything with an outcome, draw 9 cards. You probably just find another Urza.
Right.
You've got 5 mana floating, so then you go like artifact, 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 artifact. Urza is the last spell. Do it all again. And it didn't matter that Urza died.
Yeah, and like your key combo piece being an instant or a sorcery as opposed to an enchantment means that you can like play 1 Mystic Sanctuary, which not all the Urza outcome decks are doing. I was actually looking at all their mana bases right now to make sure that was something people were doing. But you know, you can, if you try to Paradoxical Outcome on their end step or something and they counter it, you can untap and you can just like fetch for a Mystic Sanctuary and Paradoxical Outcome again and just go off on your turn.
Yep. Absolutely.
So, I mean, the fact that Outcome is an instant that like sits in your hand and can't really be easily interacted with, especially with Mystic Sanctuary if they like strip it with a Thoughtseize or something or they counter it. Yeah, you have a lot more options to get it back versus Jeskai Ascendancy being your like, you know, big combo turn combo piece.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was specifically around early on day 1 that I think is just really good to watch. It was Edgar Magalhaes versus Autumn Burchett, and I legitimately went to the bathroom. I was like, "Oh, Autumn's dead. Like they're done. I'm sorry. There's no way."
What was the matchup?
Amulet Titan. Edgar's, of course, on his deck versus Autumn on Urza Outcome.
Yeah.
And I thought the game was over. Went to the bathroom, came back. Autumn somehow has like 20 Monk tokens, a dozen Thopters, and has survived, and I'm not even really sure how. I have to go back and watch this one chunk that I missed to see just how different this game went, but I thought the game was over. Edgar had resolved to prime time, and Autumn was about to pass the turn back.
Yeah, and I saw Autumn had the Monastery Mentors and Rest in Pieces in the sideboard, which I thought Rest in Peace was really interesting because like you had the Urza decks were playing like leaning on Thopter Sword, and so their like grave hate options were a little bit limited. But with this Paradoxical Outcome, you're not using the graveyard, which is one of the big advantages. And you know, especially not playing Ascendancy, you like don't use your graveyard that much at all. Emry's like the only card that cares about your graveyard, and you don't need Emry to win. Yep. So you can just board into Rest in Peace and just like totally destroy, you know, some of these dredge decks that are creeping back up with Haggle.
Or the Jeskai Ascendancy list.
Or the Jeskai Ascendancy lists.
Don't have like ways to remove a Rest in Peace, and their deck does almost nothing if they don't have it.
Yeah. Yeah, so Rest in Peace being such a powerful sideboard card that you get access to now that you're not using your sideboard, I thought that was really cool for the Paradoxical Outcome Urza lists.
Yeah, I definitely like those a lot. The Urza Ascendancy list did put one person into the top 8 of the Open. Oliver Tomiko played it. Part of me wonders how much of that is that Oliver seems like he can top 8 with anything. Like, he's just an incredibly good player.
Yeah.
I don't know that I would love to hear what his thoughts are on this actual deck actually going forward. Like if he thinks this is the better version or if he would rather be playing the more just streamlined outcome version.
Yeah, well, I mean,
we'll find out.
No matter what, like you have backup plans in this deck because you can just go off with like Saheeli or Sai or something like that and just have like a ton of 1/1s and kill them that way. You don't ever need to like have Jeskai Ascendancy even, or Mirrodin Besiege, which has been popping up. And actually, like, Mirrodin Besiege seems particularly strong in the Jeskai Ascendancy because you're like, you know, even if you don't have an Emry or even any creature, just like playing all these creatures, dumping cards in your graveyard, if you can just resolve Mirrodin Besiege at some point, you'll just win.
Yeah, eventually we'll just win. It is a perfect win condition for these decks. In a lot of ways.
Yeah. Another Modern Horizons ad. And I like Oliver's sideboard has the 3 Oko that we were talking about a little bit last week when we were talking about Oko's impact on Modern as a sideboard card for these Urza decks.
Yeah, I actually think Oko should probably just be a main deck card in a lot of... I think it's going to create archetypes. That's how good it is.
But, creating archetypes takes a lot longer than figuring out where it already fits. So that's what we're seeing right now with Oko is, it fits in these sideboards as like an answer to Chalice of the Void or an answer to
really
Pithing
everything.
Needle or, obviously pretty much everything. Also, Mystical Dispute in this sideboard.
Great card.
Yeah, great in the mirror. Great against decks that are looking to counter your combo pieces.
Pick up that 25-cent common before it becomes 50 cents. You heard it here.
It's an uncommon.
Oh, man, it's an uncommon?
Don't underestimate.
Oh, wow. Pick up that $1 common before it goes up to $1.50.
Yeah.
Do they have alt art versions of it? Can I get a storybook version of that card?
No, unfortunately, those are only the adventure cards. But hey, if you, storybook, I always forget the card. I want to say Haggle because that's the adventure, but it's called Merchant of the Veil. Yeah, you get a storybook Merchant of the Veil. Also, clearly a modern playable, as evidenced in these dredge lists. And Alex called it. Alex kept saying that, Haggle is going to replace Faithless Looting. And actually, on the show, I think I was like, well, I don't know. Is it that much better than Insolent Neonate? And it is. I mean, not that much better, but it's better enough that being an instant and having like an extra body randomly later in the game, if you're, running into hate or, the game just slows down because you don't dredge the right cards. The fact that you just have that 2/3 that can kind of gas you up a little bit, I think is helpful.
Yeah, I do think that there is definite value to the fact that you can do things at instant speed, like especially in just dodging various graveyard hate cards that are seeing play. The ability to pull things out of your graveyard can be very clutch.
Yeah, so if you're getting, Tormod's Cryptid or Nile Spellbombed or something, you can grab the dredge card out of your graveyard so that way... you can keep going the next turn. Yeah,
or alternatively, you let them do that, and then you just discard, play it, discard the dredge card, draw off of it, right? Because it discards first, if I remember right.
Yeah, it does.
So, card has enough versatility that I can buy that it's better than Insolent Neonate, but it doesn't take much to sell me on something being better than Insolent.
Well, I know. Neonate. Insolent Neonate certainly is nothing to write home about. But being a 1-drop creature is relevant for Vengevine variants, which
absolutely
are, weak enough that we aren't really seeing them a lot, but they show up. I've seen a couple of Vengevine decks still popping up in Magic Online results and stuff, and they are still playing Neonate because it is a 1-drop creature.
Sure.
These Amulet Titan decks are still just playing for Once Upon a Time. But other than that, they're kind of what we're expecting from Amulet Titan. What do you think? You were talking earlier about how much you think Once Upon a Time adds to the deck. And I think that we're seeing that. What do you have to say about Once Upon a Time in Amulet Titan?
There isn't a whole lot to say other than the fact that this deck does one thing. All it wants to do is put Primeval Titan into play. Yeah. And there is a vast difference between games where it doesn't have Amulet Titan and games where it does. The games where it doesn't have it, it might as well just be playing a deck of playing cards at your opponent because none of it does anything. The games where you do have prime time, you win in spectacular fashion, usually in a turn or two, and because you've gotten so many of the key cards, lands out of your deck, you can keep doing it no matter what they're doing to you. They can path every one of your prime times. You're going to keep going.
Yeah.
Once Upon a Time just adds to this. You get the first one's free. Every copy after that, you have the mana laying around because the turns that you are not playing Primeval Titan in this deck are incredibly mana efficient. You often just have 2 or 3 mana laying around because all you did was play a Sakura Tribe Scout or something.
Right, and you're putting an extra land into play so you have more mana, but you don't need it.
Right, so it's really easy for this deck to end of turn play the Once Upon a Time so you don't give away your hand, and then oh, by the way, this is a Primeval Titan, I'm going to play that in this turn and win the game.
Yeah.
When you were expecting that I just had nothing to do.
Yeah, these Amulet Titans are also playing they're finding room for Castle Garenbrig in their carefully constructed mana bases with all these one-ofs and combo pieces and hate cards. And there's room for Castle Garenbrig because, like you were saying, Primeval Titan is just that important that like being able to play it a turn earlier off of a Castle Garenbrig is just worth, making it work.
Yeah,
even though it's like not super consistently untapped necessarily, and you have to like find room for it in your like weirdo 5-color mana base.
Yeah, I mean, and that came up in Philadelphia. Ellie Warfield was playing Jund Death Shadow on our team, and I think it was, I'm forgetting, it was Dilks, I believe, was playing Amulet Titan and was very resource light, top deck the Titan, but would otherwise not have had the mana to cast it except for Castle Garenbrig.
Yeah.
So like that just makes the case right there for it to me. Like he would have probably lost this game had he not had exactly that land in play.
Yeah, and so for context, this list I'm looking at is playing the 2 Castle Garenbrig with 3 forests, 2 forests and 1 snow covered, and no fetch lands. And that's it. There's not a shock land I'm missing here. Is there? 2 breeding pool. So we have 5 forests and no fetch lands, but the Castle Garenbrig is just worth it. And obviously Amulet will untap it, but
and it's like a weird thing where, again, because its mana is so inefficient, like you can usually just kind of put it into play tap if you had to.
Yeah,
like,
with the Sakura Tribe Scout even,
Yep.
Whatever.
You'll find a way to get it into play before turn 4 or 5 or whatever if you need to.
Yeah. I just thought that Garenbrig, it was obvious that it was going to get played in Titan Shift and stuff like that. Other Primeval Titan decks where like they're playing a ton of basics and like ramp spells to put forests that can put forests into play. It was a little bit more unclear to me during spoiler season whether Amulet Titan was going to find room and whether it would be like worth it to find room. And it looks like it was. So that is another interesting Eldraine development here in Modern.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, if I'm an SCG grinder looking at this top 8, looking at what has historically done well and who is now picking up the deck, you see Zach Allen's on it, you see Will Pulliam's on it. I actually don't know if Will's played it before. I don't think I've seen Zach on it. He's usually playing some bizarro Esper Charm Esper deck, right? And then you have kind of the mainstays of like Dom Harvey, Dilks, Ayers, Edgar, all of them playing Amulet Titan. I would be ready for this matchup. I would expect that it's going to be one of the most popular decks at any SCG tournament. If you're on the East Coast, if you're opposite from us, like I would make sure to have a strong plan against this deck and really know how the interactions work, because I feel like that's where a lot of people lose edge against Amulet, because they don't know exactly how it plays out. Me just watching my friend Danny play this deck did so much for me being able to play against it in terms of knowing like, oh, they can go off this next turn. I need to disrupt this turn rather than try and advance my own game plan.
Yeah, for sure. And while it's true that there's like a lot of, prolific SCG Amulet Titan players, I also think that like no matter where you are, you should be prepared for the matchup, because this is like the first big Modern tournament since Eldraine came out, and it's like already showing that, or non-team tournament, there was a team tournament already, right? But this is the first big like individual Modern tournament, and so the fact that there are 2 Amulet Titans in the top 8, and it had a good showing on camera and everything, I think it's clear that it's going to be like a deck to watch out for.
Absolutely. Click on Drake's deck, because he was ready.
Yeah,
I have to give him big
let's look at
props to
this. Let's look at this sideboard here.
Specifically, he has 2 Blood Moons in the sideboard, which is not a common card for Storm to play always.
Yeah.
But it makes perfect sense when you're an SCG player and you know that all the Amulet players are like rubbing their hands together at Once Upon a Time because they're so excited by it, right?
Yeah.
Those Blood Moons did work all day from what I could tell. In the top 8, I believe they just won one of the matches for him.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, so there's not a ton of Eldraine in this deck. There's a couple of Mystical Dispute, but one thing that I haven't seen a lot of in Storm is the 3 Merchant Scroll.
That was weird.
I think it's interesting. I mean, if you can play it for only 1 mana with an Electromancer or Baral, it like I guess adds some consistency to your deck. So you can find the Gifts Ungiven to like, do the Gifts Ungiven thing, find your combo pieces and win. You can also find there's a 1 of Echoing Truth in the main. So like if you have to Merchant Scroll for Echoing Truth to get rid of a Damping Sphere or something, you can do that. I guess the only sideboard card it finds is Mystical Dispute. So it's not like a super toolboxy card. It's really just like additional copies of Gifts Ungiven, it looks like, for the most part.
Well, and what he's using those slots on, there's usually about 2 flex slots in terms of like things that you can kind of do, like an Echoing Truth and like maybe 1 more utility card and stuff.
Yeah.
And then kind of 2 of your choice of cantrips. You can play more Sleight of Hand or Opt, or sometimes you see cards like Peer Through Depths in this slot.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I think that it makes sense to play some number of Merchant Scroll, just because a lot of the times the only thing you're looking for is Gifts Ungiven.
Right.
And if you're willing to pay 2 to look at the top 5 cards of your library, you're probably just willing to pay 2 to find the card you want.
Right.
Every time.
Because no matter what you're looking for, if you're looking for like a creature to give you a discount, if you're looking for a ritual or, a remand or something, Gifts Ungiven will find all of it. So you might as well just, have Merchant Scroll as opposed to a cantrip, because it will find, instead of finding maybe one thing, it will find everything.
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing I'm surprised not to see in the list is the one of Noxious Revival, just because when it's been a while since I've played Storm, but that card is a huge crutch for getting you out of kind of, well, I think I can win, but I'd have to draw out of it, versus I can now deterministically kill you because I can go get Noxious Revival off of my Gifts Ungiven and make your piles just that much worse because I've already drawn one of these cards and had it discarded or something weird.
Yeah, it just like it allows you to do like a 3-card Gifts Ungiven, where,
Exactly. But Drake is a master. I know he's played Storm before, and I'm sure that he probably just didn't need it. Whereas I want a crutch. He probably he can just win.
Yeah,
as evidenced by this tournament.
Yeah, Gifts Ungiven is definitely a card that rewards a more experienced player with the deck. There's one other list that was doing really well on day 1 from Sam Black. The Mystic Sultai is what he called the deck, and it's a Sultai control deck playing 4 Mystic Sanctuary. Oh, only 3, down to 3. 3 Mystic Sanctuary, and then just like control, removal, and counter spells: Abrupt Decay, Assassin's Trophy, Cryptic Command, Deprive, Drown in the Lock, Fatal Push, Force of Negation, and then 3 Into the Story is like the main card advantage, and then just like the only win conditions are 1 Torrential Gearhulk and 1 Field of the Dead.
And 4 Snapcaster Mage.
And 4 Snapcaster Mage. And 4 Snapcaster Mage.
Don't discount Goblin Piker beats. Those win more than enough games.
That's true.
In all sorts of formats.
I've definitely won with Snapcaster beats. I've won with Scourge Tribe Elder beats before. I was proud of that game.
I'm disgusted.
Well, when you draw 3 of them and your opponent isn't doing anything, you can beat them up.
Fair. You activate like the Slayer Stronghold or whatnot on it. Like that's got to feel okay.
But yeah, I mean, this is like a really cool deck on paper where, it's like a new flavor of control where you're like not just jamming planeswalkers. You're kind of doing it the old fashioned way with like interaction, 1-for-1 interaction and card draw, and just like grinding your opponent out. It's cool because the blue-white control decks are not really that, because they are always playing like planeswalkers as like their main, counter your spell, path your creature, here's a Jace. Okay, the Jace is going to win me the game. But this deck is really doing it the hard way. And I think that's interesting to see. I would say that this looks like a deck that's going to have a lot of draws.
Yeah, 100%.
Especially if you don't know what you're doing with the deck. So I think that this is a cool deck to look at. I would definitely be nervous about sleeving this up and taking it to a tournament unless I had played with it a ton.
This is new enough. Is it worth talking about what the joke is here with this deck, so to speak? Like,
sure.
Because so the entire purpose of this deck and why the card is built around Mystic Sanctuary specifically is that card lets you put an instant back on top of your library from your graveyard, right? With Deprive, you now have permanent counterspell because you pick up the Mystic Sanctuary every turn, you put it back down. Now you've countered every single one of their plays. And then your quote unquote end game is casting multiple cryptic commands every turn so that you can continually loop these cryptics and bounce all their permanents or whatnot. And what enables all of this is the printing of Mystic Sanctuary. And why you only need 3 is because it might say 3, but you actually have, 13? How many fetches do they have, right? Every single
10.
Yeah, exactly. You have You have 10 fetches that go find this Mystic Sanctuary. You will always have one when you want one. Just because it's fetchable, which is the part that really makes no sense to me. Like, I don't know how this one slipped through because everyone picked up on this synergy right away. But it's here to stay now, and it's a very interesting deck. Into the Story especially is awesome in this deck because it draws so many cards for so little resources.
It's 4 cards for 4 mana. That's crazy.
It's bonkers. And they're always going to have cards in the graveyard because you're countering everything they do. So you never run out of resources.
And you have Thought Scours, so you can like Thought Scour them to turn on your Drown into the Lock or your Into the Story, which we talked about with that Grixis control deck that we talked about 2 weeks ago, I think, on the cast.
The thing that he was talking about was that he was actually afraid of how much 1-for-1 removal was in this because his only real way of getting ahead on cards are those Into the Stories. Everything else looks at one card or counters one card.
Right. Well, I mean, Snapcaster Mage can be a 2-for-1. I mean, if you can trade the body for a card, right? Like if your opponent is playing Burn or something, you can like Snapcaster an Abrupt Decay to kill their Monastery Swiftspear and block their Goblin Guide or something. I mean, Snapcaster Mage occasionally is a 2-for-1. Torrential Gearhulk is generally a 2-for-1 because it demands an answer. There's like a little bit Cryptic Command, but yeah, in general, this deck is leaning on Into the Story. But Mystic Sanctuary will allow you to rebuy it if you really need to. You also have Pulse of Marasa to rebuy Snapcaster or Gearhulk. But yeah, super cool deck. And I also think it's interesting that both this deck and the Amulet Titan decks now are leaning on snow-covered lands as like a way to turn on Field of the Dead, which definitely does not sound like something that Field of the Dead was intended to do. That you can play.
This deck plays Field of the Dead. I forgot there's that one in there, which is the backup win condition.
Yeah.
When the game's gone way too long and your deck that is mostly just trying to put islands into play somehow has to win the game. This one isn't going to abuse it super hard, but it will make a couple zombies and...
Well, right. I just think it's funny that you've got one island, 2 snow-covered island in the deck, and then a snow-covered forest, a snow-covered swamp, because the snow covereds will count as a different name for Field of the Dead, even though it's functionally the same card and snowlands are silly.
So I remember the deck tech, or I think it was the deck tech with Sam Black. He also talks, there's a one of Arkham's Astrolabe hiding in there. And that is actually a big part of the mana base, apparently, because Mystic Sanctuary needs you to have 3 islands in play already. It itself only taps for blue. You only have a couple duels. One of the big problems you can have with this deck is that you actually are hard up for non-blue colors because you have to have so many islands and blue producing lands in play just from what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
You need this Arkham's Astrolabe to like filter mana for you so that you can cast 2 black spells in a turn or whatever.
That makes sense. Because it looks like you really don't just like want... You want to have like outs to Blood Moon, and you also don't want to take too much damage off your lands. So the deck's playing 1 Watery Grave, 1 Breeding Pool, and a Sunken Hollow, which doesn't damage you but is a little clunky. So you are kind of like leaning on these basics to produce a lot of your mana because you're playing so many fetches to find Mystic Sanctuaries that like the mana base ends up being kind of awkward because you don't want to take a ton of damage, so you want to be fetching for basics. But that means like you're playing a 3-color deck. So yeah, the 1 Astrolabe is interesting. I'm wondering if that was like an addition as a one of, or if it started as more and he cut down and was like, well, I can't cut them all. I'm wondering where the starting point for this was in testing.
I have to assume, because this deck doesn't feel like it's really looking to abuse the snow lands, it's just kind of incidentally there, right? I have to assume that this is a Sam Black innovation in terms, like, 1 was the exact number that he thought he needed for games. Like, he is an incredibly good deck builder.
Oh, totally.
And I don't think that it was the sort of thing where he started off with 4, because this deck just doesn't really have much use for an artifact cantrip as opposed to every other artifact cantrip. So,
I don't know that you would start with 4, but it's hard to measure the impact that 1 Arkham's Astrolabe has on your deck, especially since like you don't have any way to search for it or fetch it with a fetch land or anything like that. So it's just like the percentage of games where you draw it, like, is it going to do enough? It's just hard to measure just 1. You know what I mean? And so
100%. Honestly, it feels like he thought he needed some amount of this effect, but he didn't really want to draw a second one.
Right. Yeah.
So you put one in because it cantrips. It's probably was taking the place of something like Serum Visions. I don't think he has any in his deck. Something like that, where it's just kind of a little bit of a low impact cantrip.
It's all instance the deck, so no Serum Visions, and Torrential Gearhook and Snapcaster also have flash, so it's a completely instant speed deck.
Yep, it's a true control deck, which is cool. Modern does not often have those.
Yeah. It just, I mean, and that's what I was saying. I like, that it's kind of doing it the old fashioned way as opposed to just jamming Planeswalkers and winning that way, which of course is a legitimate route for many control decks. And also in Modern, we see like control decks with combo finishes, like historically Splinter Twin or like the Through the Breach or, like now we're seeing some weird, like, Jace Wielder of Mysteries, Blue Moon decks, but like the kind of blue-red control shell with pick your combo win con. But this is like no combo win con, no Planeswalkers, just hit you with Torrential Gearhulk or Snapcasters.
Yeah, absolutely. Not that I definitely think that there's a place for just control Planeswalker-based control decks, since Narset, Teferi, and now I think Oko are just compelling reasons to play those.
Totally. But although I did notice that like even going down to like the top 16, there's like not a lot of blue white in this open. There's a Azorius Stoneblade, but it's playing 2 Jace the Mind Sculptor, 3 Teferi Time Raveler, and it looks somewhat like a blue-white control deck, just with 3 Spell Quellers, 4 Stoneforge Mystic in the equipment package. But that's like really the only thing that I'm seeing, even in the top 8, as far as blue-white goes.
Yeah, there were very few Stoneforge Mystic decks that I saw when I was going through. I think there's one. It's fairly stock-ish looking Selesnya Eldrazi list.
Yeah.
Playing Once Upon a Time and cutting the Karn package.
In the top 8.
Yep. And then scrolling down the rest of the list, I didn't really see a whole lot of Stoneforge Mystic, which is weird because it felt like a month ago it was everywhere.
Yeah, well, I think that's what happens like when a new set comes out or when a card gets banned, is like everybody wants to try out the new stuff, especially when it's something that's as obviously powerful as Stoneforge Mystic.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody knew that like Stoneforge Mystic was such a huge player in Standard, has always been such a huge player in Legacy, that like you kind of, that it's got enough going for it that you can, it's not hard to come up with a good Stoneforge list. I just think it's interesting. Yeah, you're right. Not only is blue-white somewhat unrepresented here, Stoneforge is too. And I think part of the reason that blue-white might be underrepresented is because a lot of these decks are kind of trying new stuff with Eldraine, with like, Amulet Titan seeing a big rise in popularity, and these Urza decks like varying just enough that it's like kind of hard to attack them at the right angle. Maybe blue-white just hasn't found its footing in this new metagame yet.
Yeah, it's also possible that because the format was moving so much more towards kind of interactive gameplay, and the last few weeks it seemed like that this was the week where the uninteractive stuff kind of broke out. You see a Dredge in the top 8, you see Storm winning the event. Amulet Titan is not really interactive. It kind of can be, and you can interact with it a little bit.
I would call it an uninteractive deck. I mean, every uninteractive deck, especially post sideboard, has like some interaction they bring in case the opposing deck is faster or trying to disrupt them, and they need to disrupt the disruption. But
well, it's so weird because like the deck is often, even just in game ones, like very interactive, just in very weird ways, like recurring a Bojuka Bog against a graveyard deck, or recurring the one. Not Hallowed Fountain, Radiant Fountain over and over, and like that's how you beat Burn. And like so you have like weird ways that you suddenly are the control deck because you are tend to be kind of a slower combo deck in a lot of ways. You're just very resilient. But yeah, I guess it probably is on the whole a more non-interactive deck.
Yeah,
than interactive.
I think so. But yeah, so we do have one blue-white control in the top 16 of the Classic, and it actually won the Classic. There were no other blue-white, but yeah, I mean, this blue-white player was able to figure out what was good, and it turns out it's the 4 Terminus 1 Entreat the Angels that we talked about last year, or last week. I always want to say last year. We talked about last week on the cast that we saw in Magic Online. With the 4 Mystic Sanctuary, you can kind of, rebuy these miracles after, playing them, or I guess you don't really have a way to get in your graveyard otherwise, but But yeah, so this is like classic blue-white playing 3 Jace, Mind Sculptor, 3 Teferi Hero of Dominaria, 2 Teferi Time Raveler, and then your typical kind of disruption package, but with 1 Entreat the Angel, 4 Terminus, that you can set up with Mystic Sanctuary for like, just Terminus every turn for a while if you have to.
Yeah, it's Mystic Sanctuary, also probably a mistake. It's currently being overshadowed in a lot of respects and from Eldraine because it feels like there's a lot of broken cards.
Yeah.
But that card does a lot because it's a
what
fetchable
Mystic Sanctuary is doing is like a little more low key than kind of what the other cards are doing, because it tends to be better in longer games as opposed to like Once Upon a Time, which tends to be found in these like creature based combo decks that are looking to end the game pretty quick.
Yeah, absolutely.
And same with Emery.
I'm curious why there's no Narsets in the main. Narset seems like such a powerful card and effect to have in the main deck. There's a lot of decks that run a lot of cantrips we're seeing.
Yeah.
Urza, the Urza deck itself actually pretty heavily relies on drawing several cards.
Yeah.
It single-handedly shuts down Paradoxical Outcome.
Yeah, and the Urza deck doesn't have a lot of like creatures to pressure with either. I mean, it's playing like all these 1 power dudes, and like it's even stops like Arkham's Astrolabe, and like I guess it doesn't stop Mishra's Bubble because they can just activate it on their turn to draw on your upkeep. But yeah, I mean, it stops a bunch of their cards randomly and prevents them from going off, and hoses Jeskai Ascendancy. And I think like going into this weekend, Urza was, I think, like kind of agreed upon as the deck to beat.
Yeah.
And so I'm surprised. Yeah, I think I agree with you that I'm surprised not to see the Narsets in the main. There are 2 in the side, and it couldn't have been that bad of a choice since they ended up winning. But yeah, I would be interested to know what the reasoning for sideboarding those Narsets was.
Oh, I actually scroll up. I actually just noticed that name. Ivan Espinoza is a local SoCal player.
Oh, awesome.
He's at all the PTQs and whatnot. So
that's cool. I didn't recognize the name, but that's good to know that he's around. Maybe we can see him at an event sometime.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the top 16 of the Classic, also there is didn't make top 8. It was 11th place. Is it Kiki-Jiki deck, similar to the one we talked about last week. I am going to talk about it again because I'm a big fan of this deck. I think it's the 4 Brineborn Cutthroat, 4 Snapcaster, and then 2 Kiki. I think the Magic Online list we saw was 3 Kiki. But yeah, it's just like it's looking to be as similar to Splinter Twin as possible, except that you have Brineborn Cutthroat as kind of like the Tarmogoyf of the old Tarmo Twin decks, where like you have this kind of 2-mana threat that you can just drop early and then try and counter everything they do and kill them with that. And you also have this combo finish that can beat them up, and you get to attack on multiple angles. Unfortunately, both your angles are creatures, so if your opponent is playing a bunch of creature removal, you might still lose. But yeah, it's got 2 Brazen Borrower as well, which is an awesome Modern Horizons card that I certainly am going to try and play in Modern, even if it doesn't really have a good home right now. But maybe this is the home for it. I think that this deck personally appeals to me a lot as a person who likes to play blue cards and red cards together. But yeah, you got Cryptics, Force of Negation, 4 Remand, 2 Spell Snare, as a counter spell sweep, 4 Lightning Bolt, 1 Mathematic Sinkhole, and then just Ops and Peaks as flash stuff.
Sorry, is that 2 Peak?
2 Peak, yeah.
Peak in 2019.
Yep.
What year is it?
Yeah, I know. Well, I like Peak. I mean, especially because it is another flash cantrip where like I don't think you want to be playing Serum Visions or Sleight of Hand in here. So if you're looking for like more cantrips, you want instant speed to grow your Brineborn Cutthroat so you can like flash back on their end step with Snapcaster. Plus, the fact that Peak looks at their hand is pretty relevant because sometimes you're going to have Pestermite Kiki combo in your hand and you want to know what the opponent hands look like. You know, you can peek on their end step. If they don't have anything, then you go for it. If they do have something, maybe you just like, you know, flash in a Snapcaster and peek again or something just to draw some cards and try and, you know, get to the point where you can combo. But yeah, I think peek is super cool in this deck. But I am really biased because of the type of deck I like.
That's fair. I feel 2 peek feels like a lot. I think that you could definitely at the very least upgrade one to a Thought Scour, which is going to work with your Magmatic Sinkhole and maybe allow you to play more than just one of the effect, because
with one Magmatic Sinkhole and 8 fetch lands, I don't think that you need to be enabling it that hard. But
sometimes you have to kill a Gurmag Angler. Like,
that's true.
Like, I think I also feel like you might want to play 2 because can be a lot of big things that you want to kill.
Well, yeah, that is true. I think that's a metagame call, and I think in this like kind of unfair metagame that we were talking about, Magmatic Sinkhole is not as good. I mean, you can kill Urza or Emery with it, but sometimes it entering the battlefield is too late.
Yeah.
So maybe like leaning on discarding counterspells is more important than leaning on removal.
Sure.
Like 4 Lightning Bolt is a no-brainer in this deck because a lot of the time, like if you draw 2 Lightning Bolts, they're going to deal 9 or 12 damage. So you really need the full 4 to like actually close out games, especially if you're on the Brineborn Cutthroat or Brazen Borrower plan. But the Sinkhole, I think, is just like purely a piece of removal, and I think that like maybe removal that only hits creatures is just not super well positioned right now.
4 remand.
4 remand.
That's a lot of remand.
That is a lot of remand. It takes me back, truly.
Yeah, I mean, so what I do like about this deck is that it feels like it's leaning a lot more into, rather than being a Kiki-Jiki deck, like it's more of like a Brineborn Cutthroat deck that just incidentally has this combo kill when you need that.
Yeah. Similar to like the Tarmo Twin decks.
Yeah, like remand definitely helps lean into that, where it just hits everything. That said, I think that if I want to be sort of a disruptive blue-red Bolt Snap Bolt type deck, I want those Blood Moons in the main in a lot of these matchups right now.
Yeah, I think that is an interesting way to kind of expand on this deck. We've definitely seen like kind of Blue Moon with Kiki-Jiki as the win con. Mm-hmm. We were talking about kind of like Blue Moon decks historically have had pick your favorite combo kill, and we've seen Kiki-Jiki in that slot. So yeah, I mean, I think that this deck could kind of go that direction. I think the problem with Blood Moon is that like it doesn't feel like something you just want to tap out for on turn 3. Like in certain matchups, yes, you do. You want to be doing it against Tron or any time kind of Primeval Titan deck. But against like Urza, it's not that high impact, and you like tapping out for it on turn 3 feels really bad, especially in this deck full of like instants that you're probably going to need against the Urza deck real quick. When they have like, you know, are fetching for basics and playing Astrolabes and Mox Opals and stuff, your Blood Moon is just not really doing a lot. So I don't know. I just think tapping out on turn 3 for Blood Moon in this deck seems counterproductive towards a lot of what you're doing. As a sideboard card, though, yeah, like sometimes turn 3 Blood Moon is just going to totally hose your Amulet Titan player and give you time to Kiki them.
Sure, maybe. I think that there's enough there that I would want Blood Moon in the main, but especially like there's a bunch of Mystic Sanctuary decks right now that just turns that off. There's a bunch of Amulet Titan running around. It feels like Blood Moon is getting back to the point where it actually hits enough things that I'm interested in having Blood Moons. But, you know, he was playing this weekend. I have the benefit of looking at the weekend in retrospect rather than trying to register a deck. So,
yeah, well, I think that we have covered pretty much what we saw at the SCGs. I'm interested to see what else Eldraine can do, because right now we've mostly seen existing decks with Eldraine cards slotted into them. And I think that there are going to be some more unique stuff built kind of around Eldraine cards like Oko or like Mystic Sanctuary, like Sam Black is working on. And I think those decks are still being tuned. And I think that we'll be seeing them in top 8 soon.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I have had the idea stuck in my head ever since I noticed that that like the legacy decks Jerry was sending me were if you remove the Brainstorm and the Force of Will and like some of the lands, it's just a modern deck. And so I've been really intrigued all day by the idea of playing like 4 Orcum's Astrolabe, like some number of like, or maybe you don't even need Astrolabe. You could just play like Noble Hierarch and Birds of Paradise or something like that, and then Teferi, Narset, Oko as just like absurd things to do on turn 2. All these mana dorks work really nicely with Oko, turning them where he gets to turn them into beasts to start beating down. Oko himself
we talked about a Magic Online list last week, and I wish I had it up here. That was doing something similar. Yeah, it was like a Bant mid range that was going like mana dork into creature, and it was playing Okos because sometimes like turn 2 Oko turn your like whatever combo piece into an elk, and then what's that elk going to do? Kill my Oko? I don't think so.
Yeah, probably not, because it starts with 600 loyalty. Yeah. But no, and then it's like, so I get all of this package together in my head, and then I'm like, oh, and then Stoneforge works really well here too, and because like especially cute is that you can turn the germ on the Batterskull into a 3/3. An attack with a 7/7
nice.
lifelink.
Yeah,
like, there are a bunch of like really cool incidental synergies that all of these things have together, and I just don't know. I wish I had an excuse to like.
And a lot of the Batterskull
hate,
a lot of the Batterskull hate is focused on destroying Batterskull, like Kolaghan's command or something. And then you're like, well, that's fine. I still have a 3/3. You know, like this Batterskull still provided a card that Oko had to help out to make it worth a card, but. Yeah,
seems very good.
So I hope to see more Eldraine in the future. But for now, I think that's the show. So thanks everybody for watching. Don't forget to find us on social media and like and subscribe to the video. We'll see you next time.
See ya.
Thank you for your attention. See you later, alligator.
This has been a production of Time Traveler Media, sending podcasts into the future.